I'm a female. I was 15 or 16 at the time this happened, and I believe it was on Halloween night. I remember feeling a sense of dread on my way home that day. My house was 2 stories tall, but only had 2 bedrooms. Most of the space was taken up by the downstairs area. At that time, I slept in the living room on a futon. At the far end of the room were these glass doors in a patio. Didn't have any blinds or anything. I was staying up late playing some video games pretty far into the night due to that dread feeling preventing me from going to sleep. I laid down with my computer still on, lighting up the room somewhat with its ambient lighting. Out of nowhere, I hear something knocking on the glass doors. At first, I tried to ignore it until it started to get more frequent and urgent sounding. I was really freaked the hell out now. I got up without looking at the doors and pretended to sleepily check the front door. As soon as I passed the corner and out of sight of those glass doors, I sprinted up the stairs and hid in the bathroom above the living room. The ventilation system was just some holes in the floor with vents over them, so I could look down into the first floor. I tried to wake my mom up and kept on trying to tell her that someone was knocking on the glass door. When she went to check though, they had stopped. She denied that anything had happened and told me to go back to sleep, telling me I must have dreamt it or something. It was all quiet for a while after. At some point though, the metal spiral stairs into the basement began to creak as well. I could hear footsteps down there. By this time, my computer had gone to sleep by itself, so it was completely dark. I couldn't see anything. The next thing I heard though was my jar of pennies that I kept for my collection, falling over and spilling coins everywhere. A few more minutes of silence after. Then the stairs creaked once more as the intruder sprinted out of the house. Lucky for me, it seemed they had been spooked by my spare change instead of venturing any further. I checked the outside door into the basement the next day. It was unlocked, of course. When I was younger, my mom had a stalker for many years. She was maybe in her early 30s at the time. I was about 3 years old and my brother was about 1 when this started. My dad would leave for work early in the morning, and as soon as he was gone, these calls would start pouring in. My mom would answer the phone, and some guy with a voice changer would answer, saying all these horribly sadistic and sexual things about what he was going to do to my mom. Needless to say, she was beyond frightened and didn't know what to do in this situation. Sometimes the caller would even describe exactly what she was wearing at that very minute, or even describe what she was doing. At the time, my parents were struggling financially, so it's not like they could just up and move. My mom started to spend more and more time at my dad's mother's house whenever he was away though. The cops tried to get involved, but whenever they tried to do something, they just couldn't trace the call. After a long time of this, we were able to save up enough money to move. I believe I was around 6 at this point. Our phone number had been changed many times and unlisted in the phone book. This was around 1988, when everyone still used landlines. The calls continued for a bit, but after enough changes, she never got another scary phone call. She did have nightmares about them for years after though. I remember when I was little even going into her bedroom one morning and her sobbing into her pillow. I didn't understand at that point, but she explained later in life that it was like she'd just woken up from a nightmare and now she could just shake and cry and let it all out. Only a couple of months after we'd moved away, the cops informed us they'd finally caught the person who was doing this. It turned out to be our next-door neighbor's 19-year-old son. He had been in the military for a short while, but had been discharged due to severe mental illness. I guess he was put into some sort of special security home now that specializes in mental health care. The lead investigator for the case said that boy was obsessed with my mother. They even found a box in his room full of candid photographs taken of her when she was out in the garden, or even playing with us kids in the yard, or out and about on town. It still gives me chills whenever I think about it now. Anything could have happened to my mother when my dad was at work, and me and my brother would have been far too young to help her. I've got a scary story for you that's a bit different than some of the others. In college, I worked security for some extra money on the side. One of my regular assignments was the overnight shift at a metal fabrication factory. One of the primary reasons I was stationed there was to ensure no one broke in to steal all the valuable metal stocked on site, which was an occasional problem. That in turn involved checking the perimeter fence for damage at least once a shift. That couldn't be done effectively by camera, mind you. Instead, it required physically walking along the fence line. So it was that one night, as I was walking along the perimeter fence, I was in the middle of a thunderstorm. My attention was on the beam of my flashlight, illuminating the fence as I walked past. I wasn't really focused on where I was stepping, despite walking through grass that was a bit over my waist. I lost my footing for a moment. I thought I just stepped awkwardly on a patch of particularly slick grass or mud, but as I started tripping downhill, before I knew it, I was sliding feet first into an open storm sewer. It seemed some asshole had stolen the manhole cover. The edges around the opening had been wet with rain and mud thanks to the storm. Let me just take a moment to explain this storm sewer. First off, it was shaped just like an oubliette. If you're not familiar with that is, picture a concrete cell shaped like a jug. A small opening at the top with sides that slope inward to prevent someone from crawling out. In this case, the bottom was maybe 10 square feet, and the opening for the manhole was twice the normal width in the center of the ceiling. There was no ladder attached either. The fall was 20 feet. At the bottom, the floor sloped to form 2 trenches in the shape of a cross. There were sewer channels going off in 4 directions, but they were maybe a foot wide across and were blocked with metal grates. At the bottom, there was tons of debris, including a large number of broken pieces of rebar and metal sticking out. There were several pieces pointing straight up toward me. I definitely would have been impaled on several jagged points of rusty metal had I fallen all the way. There was no way to escape now. As I was falling, I knew it would be at least a disabling injury as I reached the bottom. Somehow I managed to catch myself by hooking the edge of the opening on my elbow as I fell in. I dropped my flashlight to the bottom of the pit before I stopped, so I had a great view of all that twisted metal below me. Now I was struggling to escape. I could barely catch my grip. As I tried to get another handhold, my cell phone slipped out of my pocket and slammed against the bottom. It felt like forever before I struggled to pull myself out of that opening. I don't doubt my adrenaline gave me a considerable boost of strength, but even so, I nearly completely lost my hold on the edge 3 times before I managed to pull myself up slightly. I was just jerking my knees toward the opening, hoping to jump a couple of inches thanks to momentum. My free hand was scrambling for anything solid to grab onto, but I just couldn't find anything. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure how I managed to stop myself from falling all the way. It felt like a miracle. All I could think after I pulled myself out was how I wasn't due to be relieved for another 7 hours. 7 whole hours before anyone would even start wondering where I was. That entire time, I might have been trapped at the bottom of that pit, impaled on rods of rebar in the rain. I wanted to kill whoever stole that damn manhole cover. So this happened in my senior year of high school. My best friend and I were staying at her house, which was way up in one of the canyons. She had this long, winding driveway. We had been there all day long. Her mom had gone out in the meantime, and she and I were supposed to go meet a couple of friends in Hollywood that night. Anyway, we had been goofing around all day pretty much, watching scary movies and whatnot, and we were starting to get ready for our outing. Her bathroom had one of those his-her double sink deals, so she was near one and I was at the other. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, I got the creepiest feeling. All of the hairs on my arm stood up immediately, and I felt this sudden urge of panic. To this day, it's the most terrified I've ever felt. I was right in the middle of putting on eyeliner when it happened. I caught her eye in the mirror and whispered to her, "We need to leave right now." I thought she would be like, "What? You're being ridiculous." Something like that. But instead, she whispered, "I know." My blood ran cold in that moment. We left so quickly that we just grabbed whatever was in front of us. We booked it out of her house and right down the driveway. We weren't even supposed to do this because her mom had just had it repaved. Her car was parked down on the street. We rounded the curve in the driveway, only to see an SUV parked dead center in the middle of the street without any lights on. As soon as the person inside spotted us, the lights turned on full blast, and the SUV blared its horn and took off. We scrambled the rest of the way down, totally ruining the new paving, by the way. We were just about to hop into her car and drive away and call the police when her mom pulled up right behind us. As we looked back toward the house, we saw some silhouettes in the darkness, running away from it. To this day, I don't know if they were robbers or what, but the fact that she and I both got that sense of dread at the exact same moment creeps me out to no end. At the time this happened, I was with my friend outside at around 2 in the morning, playing basketball on his street. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, I got this sudden feeling of dread. My eyes flicked over at my friend, and I noticed he was staring at me with this wide-eyed look. "Hey, let's go inside," I said. "Yeah, dude, let's get the fuck out of here." Out of nowhere, though, I looked over his shoulder, only to see a gigantic car coming right towards us. I turned around. There was one coming from behind me, too. We shot each other a look again, and instinct now kicked in. There was a field to the side of his house with a chain-link fence around it. We were both pretty large kids, so we were able to climb up and over that fence real fast. We dashed across the field, only for me to look behind and see 3 people jump out of those 2 cars and start running toward the fence with us. We climbed over a second fence just beyond that one, just as the people had hopped the first one. There was a freeway right next to his house, so we climbed up the hill to run to it. We loved climbing this hill to watch the cars, so it was easy enough for us. The people behind us had a hard time, though. We started running along the freeway wall as they struggled to get up the hill behind us. The part that almost turned me to stone, though, is that as we were running, we heard a gunshot ring out in the night and leaves above us being whipped through by something. My veins turned to ice. We hid among the freeway walls and got enough of a lead to call the police. We started to loop back towards where we'd started. The cars were still there, but the people were nowhere to be seen. The police showed up in force moments later. They got the people as they tried to run to their cars and drive away. It turned out those 3 people chasing us consisted of 2 men in their late 20s and a woman in her early 20s. It seemed they were wanted members of a crime ring that was kidnapping people and raping them or using them for other things. Just thinking about what might have happened if they'd caught us makes my blood chill and my arm hairs stand on end. One dark and stormy night, I was all alone at home during this storm. I kept on getting this really nasty feeling in the pit of my gut that someone was outside watching me. I went upstairs and peeked out the window. Didn't see anything. I opened the front door, made sure the screen door was locked, then shut, locked, and chained the front door to be sure. That way, if someone wanted to get inside, at least they were going to make a hell of a lot of noise trying. Still though, I just wasn't sitting right. At least if someone were to try something, it would give me enough time to grab my gun and call the police, I thought. I'm sure there's some people who would get on me for grabbing a gun before calling the police, but I wanted it in my hand as quickly as possible. If someone was going to get through a door, a phone in my hand wasn't worth shit, no matter who I'd be calling. Because I'd double-checked everything, I was now feeling a little bit better. but the feeling still wouldn't go away, no matter how much I double-checked to make sure everything was secure. In fact, it just kept on getting even worse. It got so bad I went to grab the gun without even calling the police, just to have it next to me in case. I still try to tell myself I was just being paranoid because of the storm though. Maybe I just wasn't used to being alone during it or something. After a while, it got to the point I didn't even want to be in the house by myself, gun or not. I tried to go to bed, but of course I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake, feeling ever more paranoid and anxious. About an hour later, my mother showed up and started questioning me about why I'd been out in such a bad storm, stomping all around the yard. I went outside to check what she was talking about and found boot prints all around my house. Whoever had been out there had been following me as I went from room to room and had stayed still watching me long enough in front of the windows to sink their footprints deep into the mud. That day, I put up vinyl curtains in all the windows so nobody could see inside the house even if the lights were on. I added alarms to the windows and put a door jamb armor on all the doors. I put a PVC pipe in the track of the sliding door too and replaced my bedroom door with solid oak. I made sure there was a phone and some sort of weapon in each room of the house as well. That all cost a hell of a lot of money, of course, but that incident really freaked me out. I hate to think of what could have happened if whoever it was had decided to really try and break in. Honestly, I don't want to know who it was or why they were there either. I no longer ignore my instincts, and I regularly triple-check to make sure everything is in its rightful place. So when I was a real young kid, we had this trampoline, which meant we always had friends over trying to play on it. One night, my mom had left to take a friend home momentarily. My brother and I were like 10 and 12 at the time, old enough to stay home on our own for a few minutes, she thought. We decided we were going to play outside on the trampoline as she left. We lived in a very dense subdivision, so the trampoline was on the only piece of grass between our back patio and an alleyway that ran between all the houses. It was just starting to get dark. A car passed through the alley, and my brother waved emphatically at the driver. I jokingly scolded him, saying, "Stop waving to random people, do you want to get abducted?" All of a sudden, from the bushes on the opposite end of the alleyway, a male voice called out to us, "Yeah, you might get abducted." We bolted faster than I thought humanly possible from the trampoline and stormed into the house. Peeking out the window on the back door, we saw a middle-aged man coming out of the bushes and motioning for us to follow him. Well, of course, we didn't do that. Instead, we locked all the doors and ran upstairs to my brother's room. We armed ourselves with a baseball bat and called our mom right away. Obviously, she called the police and sped home too. She told us to stay inside no matter what. When the police finally arrived, they did not find that man hiding in the bushes any longer. Their theory was there was some college kids living on the other side of the alley just playing a prank. There was a fence in between though, and that man who had been on our side of the fence was definitely not a college-aged man. It's terrifying to think that that man had probably been watching us from inside that bush all evening long. We never found out who he was either. So in July 2017, my family and I, mom, stepdad, and me, decided to go camping in our city. There were some wooded areas with shelters around. My stepdad and I usually went alone, sometimes inviting some of my friends from school. He was the outdoorsy type of guy and had a lot of experience with it. This year, though, my mom had agreed to come along, as long as it was a place not too far into the woods. We agreed and packed all our things, brought some food we could grill on a bonfire, and drove out to said place. When we arrived, we were surprised to see 3 cars already parked outside of the place. We feared that someone was occupying the shelter already. We went in and nobody was there. To explain it briefly, the wooded area was only really around the campsite, and if you ventured just a few steps further, you would be at a very dirty beach no one ever used. We were a bit confused, but figured maybe it was some people walking their dogs or something. Not even 10 minutes later, while we're setting up, a man dressed in all black waltzed through our campsite, not saying a single word, and disappeared into those woods. Me being my paranoid 17-year-old self, I watched him very closely. I was confused as to where he'd gone. The path was very short, and he'd never returned after walking down it. My mom told us she had to use the restroom, and I informed her the man from earlier still had never come back. The night went on, and a lot of cars passed us by. We couldn't see them all, but we could hear them and see the headlights going through the woods. This was not a popular area at all, mind you, and it wasn't really a place where there would usually be a lot of people. The last time we had gone, we had only met a single couple walking their dog, and that was it. At one point, a man in a blue jacket started walking towards us. Then he spotted us and kind of hid behind a tree quickly. We were laughing a little bit. It was so obvious he was hiding. We could all see him. After a while of this, he finally stepped forward and walked towards us. He greeted us and stood there awkwardly, and we all shared some confused glances between us. The man then asked us if we were free people. After awkwardly looking at my mom's underwear, we were beyond confused. My mom awkwardly said, "Yeah, I think so." He just nodded his head. After he did a bit of weird small talk, he just walked straight back to his car. We all stood there, talking about how weird this all was, and how strange it was for all these random men to be walking around here all alone. Come nightfall, I was trying to sleep in my shelter, while my mom and stepdad were sitting and talking by the bonfire. My stepdad had this sort of flashlight thing attached to his head, sorta like a headlamp, I guess, if that makes any sense. Anyway, maybe 50 cars had passed by at this point. They all drove straight through without stopping. At about 1 a.m. though, my mom and stepdad noticed something out in the woods. They saw what looked like a person trying to sneak up on us. They could both see his silhouette out there, and my mom, of course, started getting very scared. My stepdad turned his headlamp to the side so that when he turned his head, it would still look like he was looking straight. Now he could clearly see the man sneaking up from behind a tree and watching them for over 10 minutes without making a single noise. Then, after 10 more minutes of him standing there, he walked into the forest, only for a car to emerge and drive away. At this point, they woke me up and said we had to leave right now. We frantically packed all of our things. I was so terrified as we were doing so, due to them telling me the story while we were packing. Honestly, even to this day, we have no idea what the hell this was all about. My mom has jokingly suggested it was a secret meeting spot for gay married men or something, but I don't know. There's just something weird about watching people in the forest, assuming they don't see you. Yeah, I haven't gone camping ever since, and if I ever do, it definitely won't be at that spot ever again. Oh, also, I don't know if this is important, but I remember every single one of the men we saw wearing a beanie, even though it was in the middle of the summer heat. I don't know, a weird coincidence maybe.